The scream of the wind against the barn doors woke Jacob Nash from a restless sleep, and he knew immediately that this February storm would be remembered as one of the worst Montana had ever seen in 1881. He pulled on his worn leather boots and grabbed his heavy coat, making his way through the howling darkness toward the barn where his horses were no doubt spooked and restless. The lantern in his hand cast dancing shadows across the snow as he fought against the wind, each step a battle against nature's fury. When he finally wrestled the barn door open and stepped inside, shaking off the ice that had already formed on his coat, he heard something that made his blood run cold, a soft whimpering sound that definitely did not come from any horse. Jacob held the lantern high and moved carefully between the stalls, his eyes scanning every shadow until he found her. A young woman was curled up in the corner near the hay bales, her thin dress soaked through and clinging to her shivering frame, her dark hair plastered against her pale face, her lips tinged blue. She looked up at him with terrified eyes, too weak to even attempt to run, her whole body trembling violently from the cold that had clearly been eating away at her for hours. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth, "I did not mean to trespass. I just needed somewhere to get out of the storm." Jacob did not waste time with questions. He could see she was on the edge of freezing to death, and out here, miles from Yankton proper, that meant she had walked a dangerous distance in this weather. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then scooped her up into his arms without hesitation. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel how cold her skin was even through her wet clothes. "Hold on," he said firmly, carrying her toward the barn door. "I've got to get you inside the house right now." The journey back to his cabin was even harder with her in his arms, but Jacob had been working this ranch for 10 years, and his strength was considerable. He kicked open the door to his small home and carried her straight to the fireplace, which still had embers glowing from earlier in the evening. He laid her down on the thick bearskin rug in front of it and immediately began building up the fire, adding log after log until flames were roaring and casting heat into the room. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes," Jacob said, turning to face her. She looked at him with wide eyes, fear mixing with her desperate need for warmth. "I will get you some dry things and turn my back. You have got to change, or that cold is going to kill you." He moved to his bedroom and grabbed one of his flannel shirts and a pair of wool socks, along with a thick blanket. When he returned, he placed them beside her, and then turned completely around, facing the wall. He could hear her struggling with the wet fabric, her movements slow and clumsy from the cold that had seeped into her bones. "I cannot get the buttons," she said, her voice breaking with frustration and exhaustion. "My fingers will not work right." Jacob turned slightly, keeping his eyes averted from anything improper. "I am going to help you with the buttons, and then I will turn right back around. This is about keeping you alive, nothing else." He knelt beside her and worked quickly at the small buttons of her dress, his rough rancher hands surprisingly gentle. Once he had freed enough of them, he turned away again and heard her finally manage to pull the wet garment off and slip into his dry shirt. It hung on her like a tent, but it was warm and dry, and that was what mattered. "You can look now," she said softly. When Jacob turned back, she had wrapped the blanket around herself and was sitting closer to the fire, still shivering but with slightly more color returning to her cheeks. He went to the kitchen area and put a kettle on the stove, then returned with a chair and sat down near her, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed it. "What is your name?" he asked. "Victoria Hayes," she said, pulling the blanket tighter. "I am sorry for breaking into your barn. I thought I could make it to town, but the storm came up so fast, and I could not see anything. Your barn was the first shelter I found. Where were you coming from in weather like this?" Victoria looked down at her hands, and Jacob saw tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I was running away from the Henderson ranch. I was working there as a housekeeper for the past 6 months, but Mr. Henderson decided he wanted more from me than just housekeeping. When I refused him tonight, he got angry. His wife was visiting her sister in Helena, and he said no one would believe my word over his if I told anyone what he tried to do. So I ran." Jacob felt anger rising in his chest. He knew Silas Henderson, knew him as a man with money and influence in this part of Montana territory. He also knew Henderson's reputation with women, though most people looked the other way because of his wealth. "You did the right thing getting out of there," Jacob said firmly. "You are safe here. I give you my word on that." The kettle began to whistle, and Jacob stood to make her some tea. He found some dried herbs he kept for when he was feeling poorly and added them to the hot water, then brought the steaming cup to Victoria. She wrapped her hands around it gratefully, inhaling the warmth before taking small sips. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him with eyes that were clearer now, a deep brown that reminded him of rich soil after rain. "I do not even know your name." "Jacob Nash. I run this ranch on my own, raise horses mostly, some cattle. It is not much, but it is honest work." "It seems like a good life," Victoria said, glancing around the cabin. It was simple but well kept, with sturdy furniture and a few personal touches that showed someone actually lived here rather than just existed. "Do you live out here all alone?" "I do. My parents passed when I was younger. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I have been on my own since I was 19. That was 8 years ago now." Jacob settled back into his chair, watching as she continued to warm herself. "What about you? Do you have family around here?" Victoria shook her head, sadness crossing her features. "My parents died when I was 16. They were traveling west from Ohio trying to start fresh, but there was an accident with the wagon. I survived, but they did not. I have been working as a housekeeper and cook ever since, moving from place to place. The Henderson ranch was supposed to be different. Mrs. Henderson seemed kind when she hired me, but I did not realize what her husband was like when she was not around." They talked through the night as the storm continued to rage outside, Victoria gradually warming up, and Jacob learning more about the woman fate had literally blown into his barn. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about the dreams her parents had for starting a new life out west, about the various positions she had held and the different families she had worked for. Some had been kind, others less so, but she had survived through determination and a refusal to give up. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to ease. Jacob made breakfast, frying up bacon and eggs while Victoria watched from the chair he had pulled up to the table for her. She was still wearing his shirt and wrapped in the blanket, her dark hair drying in waves around her shoulders. In the morning light, Jacob could see that she was probably around 23 or 24, with delicate features and a strength in her eyes that spoke of someone who had endured hardship, but not been broken by it. "I should probably try to get to town today," Victoria said as they ate, though her voice lacked conviction. "I need to find work, somewhere to stay." "In those wet clothes, and with Henderson likely looking for you," Jacob shook his head. "Stay here for a few days at least, until things settle down. I've got a spare room you can use. It is not fancy, but it is warm and dry. Give yourself time to recover from last night and we can figure out what comes next." Victoria looked uncertain. "I do not want to impose." "You have already done so much. You would not be imposing. Honestly, it might be nice to have someone else around for a change. This place gets pretty quiet in the winter." Jacob met her eyes across the table. "Besides, I could use some help around here if you are willing to work for your keep." Nothing like what Henderson wanted, he added quickly, seeing her tense. Just honest work. Cooking maybe help me with some of the ranch bookkeeping. I am terrible at keeping records straight. A small smile crossed Victoria's face, the first real one Jacob had seen from her. I am actually very good with numbers. One of the families I worked for in St. Louis, the wife taught me properly because she said it was important for a woman to understand finances. Then we have got a deal. Victoria hesitated for just a moment longer, then nodded. For a few days until I figure out what to do next. And thank you, Jacob. You saved my life last night. Any decent person would have done the same. Maybe, Victoria said softly, but not everyone is decent. Over the following days, Victoria settled into life at Jacob's ranch with surprising ease. She took over the cooking, which Jacob was grateful for since his own skills in that area were limited to basic survival meals. She turned simple ingredients into delicious food, making stews that filled the cabin with mouth-watering aromas and baking bread that was better than anything he had tasted since his mother died. True to her word, she also tackled his chaotic bookkeeping system, organizing his records and creating a proper accounting of his expenses and income. Jacob had been running the ranch mostly by instinct and memory, but Victoria showed him exactly where he stood financially, which sales had been most profitable, and where he could potentially save money. "You are doing better than you thought," she said one evening as they sat at the table going over the books. "You have been conservative with your spending, and your horses have a good reputation. With a little more organization, you could expand your operation." "I never really thought about expanding," Jacob admitted. "I just focused on getting through each season." "Well, you have been doing more than just getting through. You have been succeeding." Victoria smiled at him, and Jacob felt something warm spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling nearby. The days turned into a week, and then two. Victoria had long since recovered from her ordeal in the storm, and her clothes had dried, though she continued to wear Jacob's shirts around the cabin, because they were more comfortable for working. Jacob found himself looking forward to coming in from his chores, knowing she would be there with hot coffee and conversation. They talked about everything, from their childhoods to their dreams for the future, from books they had read to places they hoped to someday see. One afternoon, Jacob was working with a particularly stubborn mare in the corral when Victoria came out to watch. She leaned against the fence, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, wearing one of his shirts tucked into her now clean skirt. "She does not trust you yet," Victoria observed as the mare shied away from Jacob's approach for the third time. "She is a rescue," Jacob explained, taking a step back to give the horse space. "Previous owner beat her. It is going to take time for her to learn that not all humans are cruel." "Like people," Victoria said softly. Jacob looked over at her, understanding the parallel she was drawing. "Yeah, like people." Victoria climbed up to sit on the fence rail, and Jacob found himself distracted by the way the afternoon sun caught in her hair, turning it almost auburn in places. Over the past 2 weeks, he had become increasingly aware of her in ways that went beyond simple gratitude for her help around the ranch. He noticed the way she hummed while she cooked, the soft sound filling the cabin with a sense of home he had not felt in years. He noticed how her eyes lit up when she laughed, and how she had a habit of biting her lower lip when she was concentrating on the bookkeeping. "Jacob," Victoria said, drawing his attention back from his thoughts, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why have you never married?" "You are kind, hardworking, you have your own land. Most men like you would have a wife and children by now." Jacob turned his attention back to the mare, taking a slow step toward her. "I guess I never found the right person. After my parents died, I was so focused on keeping the ranch going that I did not have time for courting. And then years passed, and I got used to being alone. Started thinking maybe that was just how my life was meant to be. You still think that?" There was something in her tone that made Jacob look at her directly. She was watching him with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. "No," he said honestly. "Not anymore." Before Victoria could respond, they heard the sound of horses approaching. Jacob tensed immediately, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle he kept nearby. 3 riders came into view, and Jacob recognized Silas Henderson immediately, flanked by 2 of his ranch hands. "Stay calm," Jacob said quietly to Victoria, who had gone pale. "Get down and go into the house." "Jacob Nash," Henderson called out, not bothering with pleasantries as he rode up to the corral. He was a big man, probably in his late 40s, with a thick mustache and cold eyes. "I am looking for someone who belongs to me, a thief who ran off with some of my wife's jewelry." "I do not harbor thieves on my property," Jacob said evenly, stepping between Henderson and the house where Victoria had retreated to the doorway. "Her name is Victoria Hayes, dark hair about this tall." Henderson gestured. "She has been missing for 2 weeks now. You have not seen her, have you?" "Why would you think I have?" "Because yours is the only ranch between my place and town in the direction she ran." Henderson's eyes narrowed. "Now I am going to ask you straight. Is she here?" "Your wife is missing jewelry," Jacob asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "That is interesting, considering I heard Mrs. Henderson is visiting her sister in Helena and has been for the past 3 weeks. Henderson's face darkened. "What I do on my own property with my own employees is none of your business, Nash. That girl stole from me and I want her back to face justice." "Did you report this supposed theft to Marshal Dawson in Yankton?" The question caught Henderson off guard. "Not yet. I wanted to find her first." "Strange way to handle a theft. Most folks go straight to the law." Jacob crossed his arms. "I think you should leave my property now, Henderson. If you have got a legitimate complaint about a crime, take it to the marshal. Otherwise, you have got no business here." One of Henderson's men moved his hand toward his gun, and Jacob was already calculating how fast he could reach his rifle when Victoria's voice rang out clearly from the house. "I did not steal anything, and you know it, Mr. Henderson." She stepped out onto the porch, and Jacob wanted to tell her to go back inside, but he also understood that she was tired of running, tired of hiding. She stood tall, meeting Henderson's gaze without flinching. "I was your employee, and when you tried to force yourself on me, I defended myself and left. The only thing I took with me was my own wages that you owed me for the month." "That is a damned lie," Henderson sputtered, but his face had gone red in a way that suggested guilt more than innocence. "You are a thief and a liar, and I am taking you back to face charges." "You will do no such thing," Jacob said, his voice hard as iron. "She is under my protection now, and you are not taking her anywhere. Like I said, if you have got a real complaint, take it to Marshal Dawson. Let him sort it out proper." "You are making a big mistake, Nash," Henderson threatened. "I have got influence in this territory. I can make things very difficult for you." "Maybe," Jacob acknowledged, "but I can live with difficult. What I cannot live with is standing by while a man tries to hurt a woman under my roof. So you have got 2 choices. You can ride out of here peacefully, or you can try something stupid, and we can see how that works out for you." The tension stretched taut as a wire. Jacob knew he was outgunned, 3-1, but he also knew that he was on his own property and within his rights to defend it and those on it. Henderson knew it too, which is why, after a long moment, he yanked his horse's reins and turned away. "This is not over," Henderson called back. "That girl owes me, and I will collect one way or another." Jacob watched until the three riders were out of sight before he finally relaxed his stance. Victoria had come down from the porch and was standing beside him, her face pale but determined. "You should not have done that," she said quietly. "He meant what he said about making things difficult for you. Let him try." Jacob looked down at her, seeing the fear and gratitude mixed in her eyes. "I meant what I said too. You are under my protection. Henderson does not get to terrorize you." "But what if he goes to the marshal? What if he makes up lies and they believe him? Then we go to town ourselves and tell the truth first." Jacob made a decision in that moment, one that he realized had been forming in his heart for days now. "Victoria, I want you to stay here. Not just for a few days or until things settle down. I want you to stay permanently." Victoria stared at him, her lips parting in surprise. "Jacob, I cannot ask you to do that. You would be putting yourself in danger from Henderson." "You are not asking, I am offering." He took her hands in his, feeling how small and delicate they were compared to his own work-roughened ones. "These past 2 weeks have been the best I have had in years. This place feels like a home instead of just a house. And it is not just about the cooking or the bookkeeping, though I appreciate those things. It is you, Victoria. I care about you. More than I probably should after such a short time, but I cannot help it. I do not want you to leave." Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes. "I care about you too," she whispered. "So much that it scares me. I never expected to feel this way about anyone, especially not so quickly. But Jacob, if I stay, Henderson will not let this go. He is a proud man and you humiliated him just now. Then we face him together. We go to town, we tell Marshal Dawson the truth, and we let the law handle it properly." Jacob squeezed her hands gently. "You do not have to keep running, Victoria. You can stay and fight, and you would not be fighting alone." Victoria looked up at him, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "Okay, we will go to town tomorrow and talk to the marshal, together." That evening they prepared for the trip to Yankton. Jacob cleaned and oiled his rifle, more as a precaution than anything else, while Victoria wrote out a detailed account of everything that had happened at the Henderson ranch. She included dates, times, and specific incidents, creating a record that would be hard for Henderson to dispute. As night fell and they sat together by the fire, Victoria asked, "What happens after we talk to the marshal? Even if he believes us, Henderson will still be out there, still angry." "I have been thinking about that," Jacob said. "The best protection you could have would be if you were not just an employee or a guest here. If you were my wife, Henderson would not have any claim on you at all. He could not say you owed him anything or had stolen from him, because a wife's first loyalty is to her husband, not a former employer." Victoria's breath caught. "Jacob, are you proposing to me?" "Not yet," he said, turning to face her fully. "I am not going to ask you to marry me just because it would solve a problem with Henderson. When I propose to you, it will be because I cannot imagine my life without you in it, because I love you more than anything in this world, and because I want to spend every day making you happy. We are not there yet, but Victoria, I think we could get there. I think we are already heading in that direction." "I think so too," Victoria said softly, reaching up to touch his face. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact beyond accidental brushes of hands while working, and Jacob felt his heart race at her touch. "You are right that it is too soon for a real proposal, but Jacob, I want you to know that when that time comes, my answer will be yes." Jacob covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss to her palm. "That is all I need to hear." They traveled to Yankton the next morning, the journey taking most of the day on horseback. Victoria rode one of Jacob's gentler mares, sitting astride in a split skirt she had modified from one of her dresses. The town was small but bustling. The main street lined with shops and businesses, including the marshal's office at the far end near the livery stable. Marshal Tom Dawson was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened carefully as Victoria told her story, referring occasionally to the written account she had prepared. Jacob added his own observations about Henderson's visit to his ranch and the threats that had been made. "This is a serious accusation," Dawson said when they had finished. "Henderson is well known around here, has a lot of friends." "Does that make what he did right?" Victoria asked, her voice steady despite the nervousness Jacob could see in the way she gripped her hands together. "No, it does not." Dawson leaned back in his chair, stroking his graying beard thoughtfully. "But it does make it harder to pursue charges. You have got your word against his, and no witnesses to what happened that night." "What about the fact that he came to my ranch with armed men making threats?" Jacob asked. "That is intimidation at the very least." "It is, but Henderson could argue he was just trying to recover stolen property. Did he actually pull a weapon or make a direct threat of violence?" Jacob had to admit that Henderson had been careful to stay just on the legal side of things. "Not directly, no," Dawson nodded. "Look, I believe you, Miss Hayes. I have heard rumors about Henderson before, though nothing anyone was willing to go on record about. And Nash, you have got a solid reputation, but without more evidence or witnesses, I cannot arrest Henderson. What I can do is make it clear to him that I have got your statements on file, and if anything happens to either of you, he will be the first person I come looking for. Sometimes that is enough to make a man back off." "And if it is not?" Victoria asked. "Then you make sure you are never alone where he can get to you. You watch your back and you come to me immediately if he makes any more moves." Dawson looked between them. "Are you two together? As in courting?" "Yes," Jacob said firmly, putting his arm around Victoria's shoulders. "She is staying at my ranch and we are courting proper." "Good. That gives you even more protection under the law. A man cannot claim an employee has wronged him if that employee has moved on to a courting relationship with someone else. Henderson might bluster, but he knows I will be watching him now." They spent the night in Yankton at the small boarding house run by a kind widow named Mrs. Peterson. She gave them separate rooms, of course, propriety being important even on the frontier, but she also invited them to join her for dinner, curious about the young couple who had come to town with such serious business at the marshal's office. "News travels fast in a small town, Mrs. Peterson said with a knowing smile as she served them pot roast and vegetables. "I heard you had some trouble with Silas Henderson. That man has needed someone to stand up to him for years." "You know him?" Victoria asked. "Know of him, more like. His wife, Martha, she is a sweet woman. Too good for him, if you ask me. She does not know half of what he gets up to when she is away." Mrs. Peterson shook her head. "It is a shame, but that is the way of the world sometimes. Rich men think they can do as they please." "Not if we stand up to them," Jacob said quietly. Mrs. Peterson smiled at him. "You are right about that, young man, and it looks like Miss Hayes here found herself a good one in you." That night, as Jacob lay in his narrow bed in the boarding house, he thought about everything that had happened since he found Victoria in his barn. It had only been a few weeks, but she had become so integral to his life that he could not imagine going back to the loneliness of before. He knew he was falling in love with her. Probably had been since that first night when she looked up at him with those frightened eyes, and he knew he would do anything to protect her. The next morning, they bought some supplies before heading back to the ranch. Jacob noticed the way some people in town looked at them, whispers following them down the street. Word had definitely spread about their visit to the marshal, and people were choosing sides. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental, and a few openly hostile. Henderson's influence reached far, it seemed. "Let them talk," Victoria said, seeing Jacob's jaw clench as they passed a group of men who stopped their conversation to stare. "We know the truth. It bothers me that people might think poorly of you. They do not know me. Their opinions do not matter." Victoria took his arm as they walked, a gesture that felt natural despite the public setting. "The only opinions I care about are from people who actually matter, like you." The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the early March weather surprisingly mild. They talked about plans for the spring, about the foals that would be born soon from Jacob's mares, about possibly planting a larger garden than he usually bothered with. Victoria mentioned she had always wanted to try growing herbs for cooking and medicine, and Jacob found himself eager to build her whatever she needed to make that dream happen. When they arrived home, everything seemed normal at first. The horses were fine, the cabin undisturbed. But as Jacob was putting their horses away in the barn, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Someone had been there while they were gone. A message had been carved into one of the wooden stalls with a knife. "She belongs to me." Jacob immediately checked on Victoria, who was in the house unpacking their supplies. He debated whether to tell her about the message, not wanting to frighten her, but he also knew she deserved to know the truth. When he showed her, her face went pale but her voice was steady. "He is trying to scare us." "He is succeeding, at least with me," Jacob admitted. "Victoria, I cannot leave you alone here when I have to work. It is not safe." "Then I will stay with you. I can help with the horses or I can bring my work outside." "I am not going to hide in the house like a frightened rabbit." Victoria set her jaw stubbornly. "Henderson wants me to be afraid. I refuse to give him that satisfaction." Over the following weeks, they settled into a new routine. Victoria accompanied Jacob on his daily tasks, learning about the horses and the land. She had a natural way with the animals, gentle and patient, and even the skittish rescue mare started to warm up to her. Jacob taught her to ride properly, not just the basic seat she had learned but real horsemanship, and he discovered she was a quick learner with excellent instincts. They also grew closer in other ways. Small touches became more frequent, hands lingering when they passed each other items, shoulders brushing as they sat together going over the books. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jacob took Victoria's hand in his. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what we talked about before, about timing and proposals and getting to where we need to be." Victoria turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the sunset. And I think I was wrong about needing more time. I know my own heart, Victoria. These past weeks have shown me exactly who you are, strong and brave and kind and smart. You make everything in my life better just by being in it. I love the way you sing while you cook, even though you think I cannot hear you. I love how you are not afraid of hard work, how you threw yourself into learning about the ranch. I love your laugh, your smile, the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating. I love you, Victoria Hayes, and I do not need more time to know that is true." Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Jacob. I think I started falling for you that first night when you gave me your coat without a second thought, when you took care of me without asking for anything in return. Every day since then has just made me more certain." Jacob slid off the porch step where they had been sitting and knelt in front of her, pulling a small ring from his pocket. It had been his mother's, a simple gold band with a small sapphire, one of the few things he had kept from his parents' belongings. "This was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they got married in Ohio before they came west. She always said it represented the sky, infinite and full of possibility." Jacob held the ring up, his hand surprisingly steady despite how fast his heart was beating. Victoria Hayes, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the person I wake up next to for the rest of my life? Yes, Victoria breathed, holding out her hand. Yes, Jacob, absolutely yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been meant for her all along. Then Victoria was pulling him up and into her arms, and they were kissing for the first time, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you soon," he said. "I do not want to wait." "Neither do I. But Jacob, do you think Henderson will try to cause trouble at the wedding? Let him try. We will have the marshal there and my friends, and anyone who tries to disrupt it will answer to me." Jacob pulled back to look at her seriously. "Unless you want to wait, take more time to plan something bigger." Victoria shook her head. "I do not need anything big or fancy. I just need you, and a preacher, and our promises to each other. Everything else is just decoration." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Yankton. Marshal Dawson was there, as were several of Jacob's friends from neighboring ranches and some of the townspeople who had shown them kindness. Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house came and cried happy tears through the whole ceremony. Victoria wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Peterson had helped her alter from one found in the general store, and Jacob wore his best clothes, his hair actually combed for once instead of falling into his eyes. Henderson did not show up to cause trouble, though Jacob had been prepared for it. Later, they learned that Marshal Dawson had paid him a personal visit the day before the wedding, making it very clear that any disruption would result in immediate arrest. Whatever Dawson said must have been convincing because Henderson stayed away. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Jacob kissed his bride, he felt a sense of rightness settle over him, as if every difficult moment in his life had been leading to this one perfect instant. Victoria was his now, and he was hers, legally and morally, and in every way that mattered. They had a small celebration at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, with food and music and dancing. Jacob discovered that Victoria loved to dance, and though he was clumsy at first, she taught him the steps with patience and laughter. They stayed until evening, then rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, Victoria sitting in front of Jacob on his horse, wrapped in his arms. "Are you happy?" Jacob asked as they rode, his lips close to her ear. "Happier than I have ever been," Victoria answered, leaning back against his chest. "I feel like I am finally home." That night, they consummated their marriage in Jacob's bed, which was now their bed, a shared space full of tenderness and discovery. Jacob was gentle, aware that Victoria was nervous despite her desire, and he took his time making sure she felt loved and cherished. When they finally came together, it felt like the final piece of something falling into place, two people becoming truly one. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Jacob's life. Spring arrived properly, bringing with it warmer weather and new life. The mares gave birth to healthy foals, and Victoria delighted in helping care for them, bottle-feeding the one whose mother was not producing enough milk. She planted her herb garden, carefully tending rows of sage and thyme and mint. She also expanded the vegetable garden significantly, putting in seeds for beans and squash and carrots. Jacob taught her everything about running the ranch, wanting her to be a true partner in the operation. She proved to be a natural, with good instincts and a willingness to learn. Together they made decisions about which horses to sell and which to keep for breeding, about repairs that needed to be made to fences and buildings, about finances and planning for the future. One afternoon in early May, they were working together to repair a section of the corral fence when a rider approached. Jacob immediately tensed, his hand moving toward the rifle he now kept always within reach, but relaxed when he recognized the visitor. It was Martha Henderson, Silas Henderson's wife, riding alone on a fine bay mare. "Mrs. Henderson," Jacob said cautiously as she dismounted, "what brings you out here?" Martha Henderson was a handsome woman in her mid-40s with graying blonde hair and tired eyes. She looked at Victoria with an expression that was hard to read. "I came to speak with you, Mrs. Nash, if you would be willing to hear me out." Victoria glanced at Jacob, who nodded, then said, "Of course. Would you like to come inside? I can make some tea." "That would be kind, thank you." Inside the cabin, Victoria busied herself with the tea while Jacob stood near the door, not quite trusting this visit. Martha sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap, and when Victoria joined her with 2 cups of steaming tea, she spoke. "I need you to know that I believe you. About what my husband did, what he tried to do." Martha's voice was quiet but firm. "I have known for years that Silas has not been faithful to our marriage vows. I knew about the other women, the ones in town, the ones he paid for, but I convinced myself it did not matter as long as he was discreet. I told myself that was just how men were." "Mrs. Henderson," Victoria started, but Martha held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. When Silas came home and told me you had run off with some of my jewelry, I did not believe him. I knew every piece of jewelry I owned and nothing was missing. When he kept insisting, kept working himself into a rage about it, I finally got the truth out of him. Not all of it, I am sure, but enough to know that you were innocent and that you ran because he gave you no choice." "Why are you telling me this?" Victoria asked. "Because I want you to know that you were right to run, right to refuse him, right to build a new life here. And because I want to apologize. I should have seen what kind of man I married. I should have protected you and the other women who worked for us. Instead, I looked away because it was easier." Martha's eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I cannot undo the past, but I can make sure the truth is known. I have already spoken with Marshal Dawson and given him a formal statement supporting your account of what happened." Victoria reached across the table and took Martha's hand. "Thank you. That must have been very difficult. It was necessary. I have also told Silas that if he ever bothers you again, I will divorce him, and I will make sure everyone knows exactly why. Whatever influence he thinks he has will disappear when people learn the truth about his character." Martha squeezed Victoria's hand before letting go. "You deserve to be happy, Mrs. Nash. I can see that you are, and I am glad for you." After Martha left, Victoria stood on the porch and watched her ride away. Jacob came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "You think Henderson will actually leave us alone now?" Victoria asked. "I think he does not have much choice. His wife is the one with the real money and connections. If she turns against him, he loses everything." Jacob pressed a kiss to Victoria's temple. "I think it is finally over, love. I think we can stop looking over our shoulders." As spring turned to summer, it seemed Jacob was right. There were no more threatening messages, no more visits from Henderson, no more trouble. Victoria bloomed in the warmth and safety, her smile coming more easily, her laughter filling the cabin and the ranch yard. She had stopped looking like someone waiting for disaster to strike and started looking like someone who believed in her happiness. One evening in late June, Victoria asked Jacob to sit down at the table because she had something to tell him. Her expression was nervous but excited, and Jacob felt his heart start to race with possibilities. "I am with child," Victoria said, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "The baby should come sometime in late January or early February if my calculations are correct." Jacob felt like all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. A baby, he was going to be a father. "Are you sure?" Victoria nodded, smiling at his stunned expression. "I am sure. I have missed my monthly twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. Mrs. Peterson told me what to look for when we were in town last week. Victoria, that is." Jacob stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "That is the best news I have ever heard. Are you happy about it?" "I am terrified," Victoria admitted against his chest. "But yes, I am happy." "So happy, Jacob. We are going to be a family." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Victoria continued to work alongside Jacob as long as she was able, though he became increasingly protective and worried about her doing too much. She laughed at his concerns, but also let him take over some of the heavier tasks, focusing instead on the bookkeeping and lighter chores. They spent the fall preparing for the baby's arrival, converting the spare room into a nursery. Jacob built a cradle from oak, carving delicate patterns into the wood during the long evenings. Victoria sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced skill as she created beautiful things for their child. In December, the first heavy snow of winter arrived, and Jacob made sure they were well stocked with supplies. He did not want to risk being caught unprepared like Victoria had been that night she first arrived. The irony was not lost on either of them that their baby would be born around the same time of year that they had met. "Do you think our child will appreciate the story of how we met?" Victoria asked one evening as they sat by the fire, her hands resting on her very swollen belly. "Or will they be horrified that their mother was freezing in a barn?" "I think they will appreciate that their mother was brave enough to escape a bad situation, and that their father was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time," Jacob said, placing his hand over hers on her stomach. The baby kicked, and he felt it through her dress, still amazed by the reality of the life growing inside her. Victoria went into labor on a cold February night in 1882, almost exactly 1 year after she had first stumbled into Jacob's barn. Mrs. Peterson had come to stay with them 2 weeks earlier, having experience as a midwife, and she took charge immediately when Victoria's pain started. Jacob was banished from the bedroom, left to pace in the main room and worry. He had never felt so helpless in his life, listening to Victoria's cries through the door and unable to do anything to help her. Mrs. Peterson came out periodically to give him updates, assuring him that everything was progressing normally, but the hours stretched on endlessly. Finally, in the early hours of morning, Jacob heard a new sound, a baby's cry, strong and healthy. Mrs. Peterson opened the door with a huge smile on her face. "You have a son, Jacob, a beautiful, healthy boy. Come meet him." Jacob entered the room on shaking legs. Victoria was propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. She looked up at Jacob with tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. "Meet your son," she whispered as Jacob sat on the edge of the bed. He looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. The baby had a wisp of dark hair like Victoria's and was watching the world with unfocused but curious eyes. "He is perfect," Jacob breathed, gently touching one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb instinctively, and Jacob felt his own tears start to fall. "You are perfect, Victoria. You did so well." "What should we name him?" Victoria asked. "We talked about names, but we could never settle on one." Jacob thought for a moment, looking at his son, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. "How about Samuel? Samuel Nash. It was my grandfather's name, a good strong name." "Samuel," Victoria repeated, testing it out. "I love it. Samuel Jacob Nash. After me." Jacob was touched. "Of course after you. You are his father and the best man I know." Victoria kissed the baby's forehead, then looked up at Jacob. "We made him together out of love and hope. He deserves to carry your name." Baby Samuel proved to be a content child, sleeping well and eating enthusiastically. Victoria recovered quickly from the birth, and soon the cabin was filled with the sounds of a baby, soft coos and occasional cries, and the constant activity of new parents learning to care for their child. Jacob was hands-on from the start, insisting on taking his share of the work. He learned to change diapers, to rock Samuel to sleep when he was fussy, to give Victoria breaks so she could rest. He would walk the cabin floor at night with his son against his shoulder, singing soft songs his own mother had once sung to him, marveling at how something so small could be so important. As spring arrived again, Victoria started taking Samuel outside with her while she worked in the garden, laying him in a basket in the shade while she tended her plants. Jacob would find them there sometimes, Victoria talking to the baby as if he could understand, telling him about the herbs and vegetables, about the ranch and the horses and the life he was growing up into. One afternoon, Jacob came in from working with the horses to find Victoria at the table going over the books as usual, but with Samuel on her lap, his tiny hands reaching for the papers. Starting him early on the bookkeeping, Jacob teased, leaning down to kiss both his wife and son. "He is interested in everything," Victoria said proudly. "Watch how he follows the pen when I write." Jacob watched as she demonstrated, and sure enough, Samuel's eyes tracked the movement with intense focus. "He is going to be smart, just like his mother, and strong like his father." Victoria looked up at Jacob with contentment clear in her eyes. "We have built something good here, haven't we? We have built something amazing." Jacob pulled up a chair next to her, reaching over to let Samuel grab his finger. "A year ago, I was alone in this cabin, thinking my life was complete as it was. I had no idea I was just waiting for you to come into it and show me what I was missing. I was lost that night in more ways than just being caught in the storm," Victoria said softly. "I thought I would spend my whole life moving from place to place, never having a real home. You gave me everything I did not even know I needed." Over the following years, Jacob and Victoria's life together continued to grow and flourish. The ranch prospered under their joint management, Victoria's organizational skills and Jacob's ranching knowledge combining to create a successful operation. They expanded their herd, built additional corrals, and gained a reputation for raising some of the finest horses in Montana Territory. Samuel grew into a bright, curious child who loved following his father around the ranch and learning about the animals. When he was 2 years old, Victoria became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Victoria's mother. Sarah was followed 3 years later by another son, Thomas, named for Jacob's father. The cabin had grown too small for their expanding family, so Jacob built a proper house with 3 bedrooms upstairs and a large kitchen and living area downstairs. Victoria created a true home there, with curtains she sewed herself and furniture Jacob built during the winter months. There were always flowers in vases during the warm months, always the smell of baking bread, always the sounds of children playing and parents laughing. They faced challenges, of course. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and lean financial times. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating victories as a team. Their love deepened over the years, growing from the passionate intensity of new romance into something more solid and enduring, a partnership built on respect and trust and genuine friendship as much as desire. Silas Henderson died when Samuel was 5 years old, a heart attack taking him suddenly. Martha Henderson sold the ranch and moved to Helena to live with her sister, but before she left, she came to visit Jacob and Victoria one last time. "I wanted to thank you," Martha said as she held baby Thomas and watched Samuel and Sarah play in the yard. "Watching you two build this life together, seeing what a real marriage should look like, it gave me the courage to leave Silas even before he died. I spent the last years of his life living separately, building my own life. I have never been happier." "I am glad," Victoria said sincerely. "Everyone deserves happiness. Indeed they do. And I am so glad you found yours." When Montana became a state in 1889, Jacob and Victoria celebrated with their children and neighbors, proud to be part of this new chapter in the territory's history. Samuel was 7, Sarah was 5, and Thomas was 2, and they were growing up in a world their parents had helped shape, in a home built on love and hard work and perseverance. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset, the children finally in bed after a long day of celebration, Victoria leaned her head on Jacob's shoulder. "You ever think about that night I showed up in your barn?" she asked. "All the time," Jacob admitted. "I think about how easily things could have gone differently. If I had decided not to check on the horses that night, if you had gone a different direction in the storm, if either of us had made different choices. But we did not. We found each other exactly when we were supposed to." Victoria looked up at him. "I used to think I was unlucky, losing my parents, having to work for people like Henderson. But all of it led me to you, and I cannot regret any of it because I got this life as a result." Jacob pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You know what I think. I think you were never unlucky. I think you were the bravest person I ever met, surviving everything life threw at you, and still having the courage to run when you needed to trust me when you had no reason to build this life with me even though you had been hurt so many times before." "We built it together," Victoria corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you. That is what marriage is supposed to be, two people stronger together than they could ever be apart." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the evening, the horses settling in the barn, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through the grass. The same wind that had brought a snowstorm one night 8 years ago and delivered Victoria into Jacob's life. As the years continued to pass, the Nash family became an integral part of their community. Victoria was known for her kindness and her sharp mind, often called upon to help settle disputes or offer advice. Jacob served on the local council, working to improve conditions for ranchers and farmers in the area. Their children grew up strong and confident, raised with love, and taught the value of hard work and integrity. Samuel inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's head for business. Sarah became a teacher, opening a small school in Yankton for children whose families lived too far from the main schoolhouse. Thomas followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a rancher himself, though he focused more on cattle than horses. When Samuel turned 18, Jacob officially made him a partner in the ranch, recognizing that his son had earned the right to have a real stake in the operation. Victoria taught Sarah everything she knew about teaching and numbers and thinking for herself in a world that did not always value women's intelligence. Thomas learned ranching from both his parents, benefiting from their combined knowledge and experience. Jacob and Victoria grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and memories, by children raised and challenges overcome, by a lifetime of choosing each other every single day. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, And there was food and music and dancing just like at their wedding. Jacob led Victoria onto the makeshift dance floor, and they moved together with the ease of long practice, no longer clumsy but graceful, two people who knew each other's rhythms perfectly. 25 years, Victoria marveled as they danced. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. Best 25 years of my life, Jacob said firmly, and here is to 25 more. At least, Victoria agreed, her eyes sparkling. When the celebration wound down and their guests had left, when their children had returned to their own homes, Jacob and Victoria walked out to the barn, hand in hand. It was late February, almost exactly 25 years since that fateful night, and there was snow on the ground, though nothing like the blizzard that had brought them together. "This is where it all started," Victoria said, looking around the barn that had been rebuilt and expanded over the years but still stood in the same place. "This is where I found you," Jacob corrected. "Cold and scared and absolutely beautiful." "I was not beautiful. I was half frozen and terrified." "You were beautiful," Jacob insisted. "You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen because you were brave and strong and you survived. You fought your way through a storm to stay alive, and that determination, that refusal to give up, that is what I saw. That is what I fell in love with, even if I did not realize it yet." Victoria turned to face him fully, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "You saved my life that night, not just from the cold but from hopelessness. You showed me that good men existed, that love was possible, that I could have a home and a family and a future. You gave me everything, Jacob. We gave each other everything," Jacob said, pulling her close. "That is what makes this work. We are partners, equals, two people who chose to build something beautiful together." They stood there in the barn for a long time, holding each other in the same spot where their story had begun, grateful for every moment that had led them to this point and every moment yet to come. Jacob and Victoria lived to see their grandchildren born, 8 in total from their 3 children. They delighted in spoiling them with treats and stories, teaching them about the ranch and the land, passing down the history and values that mattered. Victoria taught her granddaughters that they could be anything they wanted to be, that intelligence and strength were not masculine traits, but human ones. Jacob taught his grandsons that real strength included gentleness, that protecting those weaker was a duty, not a choice, that a man's character was defined by how he treated women and children and animals, those who could not defend themselves. When Jacob turned 55, a fall from a spooked horse left him with a badly broken leg that never quite healed right. He walked with a cane after that, and it slowed him down some, but he adapted, finding new ways to contribute to the ranch. He focused more on training and business, while leaving the physical work to Samuel and Thomas. Victoria's eyesight started failing around the same time, so she got glasses that she wore perched on her nose while doing the bookkeeping, and she never complained about getting older, just adjusted and carried on. They celebrated their 40th anniversary quietly, just the two of them, sitting on the porch they had sat on countless times before, watching another Montana sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. 40 years, Jacob said wonderingly. "We have been married longer than most people live." "And I would do it all again," Victoria said immediately. "Every single moment, even the hard ones, because they all led us here. No regrets, not a single one." Victoria took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long habit. "You are the best decision I ever made, Jacob Nash. The best thing that ever happened to me. You are my miracle," Jacob said softly. "The night you came into my life, I did not know it yet, but everything changed. You changed everything. You made my house a home, my life complete, my heart full." I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is how it works with us. It just keeps growing. They sat together as darkness fell, neither needing to say anything more. Everything important had been said in the life they built, in the choices they made, in the love they showed each other every single day. They had started as two lonely people finding each other in the midst of a storm, and they had become a family, a legacy, a love story that would be told to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren for generations to come. As the stars came out above them, the same stars that had shone on that night 40 years ago, Jacob and Victoria held hands and counted their blessings. 3 healthy children who had grown into good adults. 8 grandchildren who brought joy and chaos into their lives. A ranch that prospered and provided for their family. Good friends and a strong community. Health enough to enjoy their later years. And most importantly, each other. Still deeply in love after 4 decades of marriage, still best friends and partners, still choosing each other every single day. This was the happy ending they had built together. Not a fairy tale, but something better. Something real and earned and precious. They had survived storms, both literal and metaphorical, had faced challenges and overcome them, had loved each other through good times and bad. And as they sat together under the Montana sky, growing old but never growing apart, they knew that this was exactly where they were meant to be, exactly who they were meant to be with. The cowboy had found her freezing in his barn at midnight, and he had warmed her with more than just fire. He had warmed her with kindness and protection, with respect and love, with a steadfast commitment that never wavered. And she had given him the same in return, transforming his lonely existence into a life full of meaning and joy. Their story was one of hope and second chances, of finding love in unexpected places, of building something lasting through dedication and partnership. It was a story that proved that happy endings were not just for fairy tales, but could be achieved by real people willing to fight for them, to work for them, to cherish them once they were found. And it was a story that, unlike some tales, truly did end happily ever after.